Hello everyone, and welcome to Daisy's Dolls. Now, even though Halloween and its festivities has technically passed us by, I still don't think the spooky season is completely over. The air is chilly, it's getting darker, and the leaves are falling, and since there was no Halloween video this year, I'm coming in late with this spooky video nonetheless. But that's not all. This video is actually a collaboration with Alex and Barb from Enchanterium. They will be making a custom doll with the same mystical and spooky vibes, so make sure you check out their video after this one. Before we jump into the project, let's look at some ideas and concepts. My head was all over the place when it came to this project, but one thing I knew is that I wanted a fantasy horse creature with some type of horns. After some brainstorming, the idea of making the horns into trees or tree branches with falling leaves struck me. Exploring that idea further, I thought that the Japanese maple tree would be a really good choice for them color-wise. I really liked that idea, so one thing led to another and I ended up with a design inspired by Japan and Japanese culture. I'm really not good at concept art as you can see, but I had a whole Pinterest folder to back me up, so with that, I think I'm ready to start the project. I started off by asking my dad to saw off these two horses' heads. Oh, and this black horse was purple on the inside, which really surprised me. It was all going smoothly until... Luckily, it did land on the balcony though. Alright, so here are my victims. This is the Collecta Hanoverian Stallion, and this one is the Collecta Frisian Stallion. They both have really nice head sculpts, however the Frisian has a bit more of the expression I'm looking for. The rest of the Frisian is also very nicely sculpted, however the hair is a bit much for what I'm looking for, so that's why I decided to head swap the Frisian head to the Hanoverian body. I thought I could use the neck on the original sculpt, but it's not really working, so one second. As usual, I'm going to soften up the hard edges with a box cutter. I also remove the text on the belly, as well as the mane and ears of the head. Now they are prepped and ready to be reunited, so I'm going to drill into both the body and the head. Alright, there we go. I'm going to use a pretty thick florist wire to connect the body to the head. Ah, it's perfect. With some minor head and neck adjustments, I'm happy with the pose, so I'm going to lock it in place with this Loctite glue. And while the glue is still wet, I wrap the wire with aluminum foil to flesh it out. The procedure so far has become such a routine for me that I almost forgot that this is supposed to be a fantasy creature. So I marked up where I want those horns to go, taking into consideration how they will look in comparison to the eyes and ears. I drill on the marks drawn. And after inserting the armature wire, it's looking kind of terrifying. Now this guy has a really nice tail, but again, it's not what I want for my design. So after a lot of wiggling with the knife, it came off. I'll definitely save this for another project though. In return for getting his tail chopped off, I am giving him this very stumpy, ugly tail, but I promise it will look nice in the end. Oh gosh, what have I created? It's nothing some epoxy can't fix, right? I scoop out 2 equal-sized blobs of the sculpting medium, then mix them thoroughly together, then start sculpting. I use the first layer of epoxy just to secure the wires and the aluminum foil. And while that epoxy is curing, I'm going to try to make these horns look a little bit more tree-like. I wrap a thin wire around the base wire and twist the wire outwards at some places to look like branches. Yeah, that doesn't look too shabby. I'm going to repeat the exact same thing with the other horn, and by the way, I'm using this wire for wrapping. Back to the epoxy, it's time for the second pass. I tried to begin sculpting, but this little wire tail was really bothering me, so I just... There we go. Luckily, wire is bendable. I start laying down the epoxy on the neck, focusing mostly on silhouette and the bigger muscles. Oh, and just before the epoxy fully cured, I made a slit down the neck like this to make room for the mane this boy will receive later. I continue on sculpting the neck, adding more muscle definition, wrinkles, and details. So up until now, I've been referring to this model as a boy for obvious reasons. However, I actually planned on this character being a mare. So I'm sorry boy, but this must be done. I used both the knife and a wire cutter to try to remove all the parts, but apparently I was not being careful enough because I ended up accidentally slicing into my hand. Alright, it wasn't too bad, so I just patched myself up and got back to sculpting. Now, I wanted my character to look kind of elegant and a little bit scary, but the current model's eyes look a bit more spooked than spooky, so I modified them with epoxy to fit my aesthetic. I set the model aside for 24 hours, and when I come back, the epoxy is hard and ready to be sanded. I'm going to take her out and give her a quick spray of primer, and this will help me pick out any imperfections that I couldn't see while sanding. She's still missing some important sculpted details, so I started by sculpting her mare parts, and also her long pointy ears. They added a bit of sass to her expression, and I really like that. I sculpted some raised details on her face to try to sell the illusion that the horns are actually a part of her. I wanted to thicken the horns just a smidge, but I really couldn't come up with a good way to do it, but my best idea was to cover them with superglue. Since I applied quite a lot of superglue, there were a few drops, and to prevent them from dropping onto the horse, I hung it up by the legs, and this... I don't even know, it looks so bad. It was worth it though. When the superglue dried, it created a crinkle effect, and it actually looks a lot like tree bark. The last thing I'm going to do before I paint is to use this PBO porcelain liner to add some raised vein details. I went a bit ham with it and added it to all the legs, to the belly, the face, and around the horns. Stepping outside for a bit, I gave her a thorough spray of my primer while wearing gloves and a mask. Alright, now we're finally ready for paint. Oh, that was right on my black shirt. Ugh. Anyways, I'm going to mix in a small drop of black and red in with a lot of white to make this kind of off-whitish color. For the paint and accessories of this horse, I took a lot of inspiration from the Japanese geishas' makeup, accessories, and clothing. Most geishas paint their faces with a white foundation called oshiroi, and that was my inspiration for this color choice. After many thin layers of acrylic paint, she's opaque and ready for sealant. This step is crucial both for the longevity of the paint as well as for the pastels to stick properly. After drying for 12 hours, she's ready for said pastels. I apply black ones to the legs and face. I also use a pale pink pastel to gently blush her body, as well as to pay an homage to the pink powder called tonoko, which the geishas would use to blush their pale skin. After sealing in the pastels with another layer of sealant, it's time for acrylic paint. When geishas paint their faces white with the oshiroi, they often leave a small piece of skin exposed, particularly around the hairline and on the back of the neck in this particular V or double V shape. Geishas do this to create the illusion of a mask, and that is why I am painting this double V shape or sabonashi on the withers of my character. I paint the sabonashi in black as I want it to appear as this horse has a black coat underneath the white mask. I start highlighting the raised vein details using several shades of blue, burgundy, and red. I want this design to resemble a tree, much like her horns, which will have red leaves as well. I try to dramatize her facial features, making her look scary yet elegant. Now let's paint the horns in a more appropriate color. To breathe some life into those static looking horns, I'm going to use the dry brushing technique to pick out some details. Back to the face. Well, I think I want some shine to it, so I'm going to take this MAC highlighter and blend it with a little bit of water and apply it to the face. Ooh yeah, look at that shine. I'm using the tiniest brush I own to delicately paint in her sassy eyes. And I decided to add little eye shines as well. Phew, her paint job is finished and I'm very pleased with it. However, she's looking rather bald at the moment, so let's fix that using some acrylic yarn. To do this, I'm using Mosekito's very helpful yarn wing tutorial, and I'd recommend you watch that if you want a more thorough walkthrough. I use an iron to press those suckers flat. And I end up with these shiny bundles of acrylic hair. To make them into manageable wefts, I cut them off, then use wood glue to glue them onto some cellophane. Once dry, I can peel it off of the cellophane and give it a small trim. And then they're finally ready to be attached to the horse. Once all the wefts are glued on, it's looking rather crazy, so to style it, I'm going to use a tip I learned from Delightful. Using caution, I heat up a metal butter knife with a hair straightener. Then I press that onto the yarn hair to tame the poof. I also borrowed a metal knitting needle from my mom, and I used that to create some subtle curls. For those strands of hair that did not want to lay down, I brushed on a mixture of glue and water. And after a lot of styling, this is how it turned out, and I'm honestly really happy with it. To add some more shine, I add some accents of dark silver paint to her face, horns, and hooves. I had a really good time making some accessories for her off camera. This one is loosely inspired by a Japanese wind bell or Fuurin, and I tried to make it look aged and oxidized, and I really like how the turquoise looks with the red. This little dangling thing is inspired by a hairpin that geishas often wear called bira ogi. These hanging from her ears are supposed to be Ofuda talismans, and I tried my very best to copy an actual one, but I don't write or speak Japanese, so I can just hope that I did a good job. And this piece on her tail is loosely inspired by a hairpin called Miyokuri. I decided I also wanted to add these pins just behind her horns. Speaking of her horns, I don't want them to look so bare, so I individually cut out some leaves out of tissue paper and painted them. I delicately attach most of the leaves to the horns with glue, as well as adding some fallen ones to her mane. As a last finishing touch, I created this tiny bird out of clay and tried my best to make it look like a Japanese green woodpecker. And as I glued it to one of her horns, this project is finally finished. The sun is setting, and deep in Japan's green forest, among birds, insects, and other animals, lurks the spirits of the forest, the divine gods that live quietly and harmoniously among the animals, trees, and lakes. Can you hear that? It's the sound of Fuurin. Fuurin is the word for wind chime in Japanese. However, it's also the name of a spirit inhabiting this forest. Her white coat reflects the light in an unnatural way. Her bluish eyes resemble the color of her weathered wind chime. Her long hair sweeps the mossy forest floor, and her antlers, resembling a maple tree, sheds burgundy leaves as she gracefully makes her way through the foliage. You don't usually hear this sound, deep in the desolate woods. The only time you would hear the ringing sound of Fuurin is if there's a plague spreading among the people in the area. The beautifully haunting rings of her wind chime cleanse the air and keeps humans safe. However, that is only if they respect her beloved home, the forest. So say hello to Fuurin. Yes, I decided to name her literally wind chime in Japanese, but I think it sounds like a really nice name and I think it suits her. This project was very different from what I usually do, but I gotta be honest, I enjoyed it way more than I thought I would. I really enjoyed doing the research for this project, and I would really like to do something similar in the future. I really hope you enjoyed watching Fuurin come to life, and I hope you enjoyed the little short film as well. Also, do not forget to check out Enchanterium's video. They did a fantastic job on their doll, and I can't wait to watch the video as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!